How did one of the world's best oil companies fall back to minimum production levels after a boom in hydrocarbon prices? In the last decade, the name of the state-owned company Petróleos de Venezuela, or PDVSA, went from being recognized for its quality standards to being linked to personal layoffs, a drop in production, and acts of corruption in which millions of public resources were squandered and ended up in the pockets of former directors, high government officials, and their private allies. How did PDVSA get to this point? A series of legal reforms and financial abuses tell the story. The new 1999 Constitution expanded the powers of the executive to issue enabling laws and make decisions for the oil industry with fewer controls. In 2002, a new hydrocarbons law was passed. It progressively dismantled the oil opening. Over the years, private companies operating in the industry were forced to accept PDVSA as a majority partner in a joint venture structure. That same year, an oil strike began, and as a consequence, in 2003, former President Hugo Chavez fired more than 20,000 employees who participated in the stoppage. February also saw the introduction of a strict exchange control, which became a big incentive for corruption, especially in the oil sector. Later, in 2004, the then Minister of Petroleum, Rafael Ramirez, was appointed president of PDVSA. This destroyed the independence and oversight role of the ministry and exacerbated corruption risks. PDVSA went from being a hydrocarbon company to a company that financed social projects. The Plan Bolívar 2000 was an emblematic case of corruption, which handled some $100 million. The exact scope of its activities is unknown. This was only the beginning of direct financing by PDVSA to opaque social programs. In 2005, PetroCaribe was created, an energy agreement that contemplates the sale of Venezuelan oil under preferential conditions to about 20 countries, which resulted in corruption. The cooperation agreement served the government as a diplomatic tool to obtain the support of countries in international forums and strengthen its position in the region. Also in 2005, a partial reform of the Venezuelan central bank was approved, which allowed PDVSA to manage its own foreign currency. The oil company was only required to sell to the BCV the foreign currency necessary to pay its obligations in local currency, while the rest could be used to pay debt and to allocate it to parafiscal funds. One of the funds that received the most resources from PDVSA was the National Development Fund, FONDED, which served as a government petty cash box that was never audited. It left severe corruption allegations and unfinished works. Meanwhile, in an environment of high oil prices, PDVSA began to issue a large number of bonds to meet government requirements. The bond issues encouraged corruption. They could be purchased with local currency, but were payable in dollars at a preferential exchange rate. The award process was not transparent. In the same context, PDVSA acquired loans with China, payable in crude oil, to finance non-oil investment projects. The Venezuelan-Chinese Joint Fund and the Long-Term Large Volume Fund, administered by the Venezuelan Development Bank, or BANDES, were created and received $50,240,000, of which more than $16,731,000 were due by the end of 2019. As in many other projects, there are more doubts than certainties regarding the fund's administration, which was characterized by a lack of accountability and discretion. Later, in 2017, PDVSA was militarized and its production levels fell to historic lows. 3 years later, the emergency in the sector was declared. All these decisions encouraged and facilitated corruption within the oil company. Transparencia Venezuela has registered 127 cases of alleged corruption in PDVSA, which translate into irregularities that compromised more than $42 billion of the Venezuelan public patrimony. Falling production and the diversion of huge amounts of money prevented billions of dollars from being invested in social welfare and development. In addition, institutional weakness has allowed major corruption cases to go unpunished. Today, that structure created by Chavez and Maduro, which facilitated corruption in PDVSA, remains intact. Nothing has been corrected in spite of the enormous corruption scandals registered since 2006. Change is urgently needed. Transparency, accountability, and sanctions for those responsible are required to end impunity.